Committee here at Arch. Thank you all for coming and welcome. This is our second to last lecture in our Fun and Free lecture series. And I want to thank the Lupke Family Trust for sponsoring our Fun and Free lecture series. As all of you know, this is our bicentennial for Fort Wayne, and Arch has always tried to present programs that are diverse in subject matter, and when it came to addressing the bicentennial, we decided to do something a little different. We decided that it was important to get different points of view and different perspectives on what the bicentennial in Fort Wayne means to different people. And so we asked Logan York, who, as you can see, is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Myaamia, I always struggle that, tribe of Oklahoma. And we asked him to come today to talk to us about some different perspectives that they have on the bicentennial. Before that, I'd like to just give you a little bit of Arch information. Sitting on your chair is not only a membership application, but a little information about Arch. If you are not a member, we would really appreciate it if you would become a member. One of the ways that we can do these lectures and give them to you for free is that people become members and they support our mission. And if we don't have the staff and the ability to rent space, et cetera, then we no longer have a fun and free lecture series, which I think all of us really enjoy. Also, if you are so inclined and you are happy with our program, there is a donation jar as you leave. And if you feel so inclined, we would love to have any donation that you would give us. As far as upcoming events, on June 22nd is our historic house tour. It will be in the South Wayne neighborhood this year, and tickets go on sale May 15th. If you are interested in any other Arch information, it is archfw.org, or just do what I do because I can never remember that stuff, and just Google Arch and you will come up with what you need. Our last lecture is May, I believe it's 18th, and I should know that because it's mine. And I am going to do a lecture on, it's called A House in a Box, Sears Kit Houses. And we have lots of them in Fort Wayne, so if you're at all interested in that subject, it is the same time, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and this location. Some of the things that I had asked Logan to maybe talk about was a little bit of history of the Myaamia tribe pre-contact with all of us, and then post-contact. One of the things that's always driven me crazy as a historian is to say that Columbus discovered North America, because in my wildest dreams I have never figured out how you discover someplace where people are already living. So, there was a wonderful culture here before we ever came, and Logan has a great ability to talk quite a bit about that, and we talked about questions, and I know that he is interested in what we're interested in. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask him. One of the things that I asked him about was the language, which had been dormant for a while and now is being spoken and taught again, which I think is just so unbelievable. But anyway, without further ado, this is Logan York, and I welcome him to Arch's lecture series, and thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Aya Cheke, Michigan Points on it. Hi everybody, my name is Logan York. As she said, I am the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. And I would repeat, if you guys have any questions at any time, please ask. I would much rather spend this entire time answering questions that you guys already have rather than going over this presentation again. Alright, so I'm going to start with our oldest story that we have. It is called Our Emergence, or Our Coming Out Place. This is a story that can be taken in two different ways. it can be taken as a creation story or as a ethnogenesis. This I've always taken as a historical narrative rather than one of our creation stories or winter stories. This thing describes us coming out of the water in the South Bend region, separating ourselves as a separate people than whoever we were before. It describes us coming out of the water, literally coming out of the water and grasping its branches, and it's where we actually get some of our modern tribal names today. I've always kind of taken that as a artistic license on literally getting off of our canoes as we came down from south from Canada. That is our origin story, but we know we also have stories of us being somewhere where it's always light and always dark sometimes, and it's always snowy in that place. So we have stories of us being in the far northern reaches of Canada or Alaska, which means those stories are very, very old. We've been in these places since time immemorial, as we like to say. Before contact with Europe, we think there were between 5 and 30 million people in the continental United States. We had cities, we had nations, debatable whether we had empires here. But these people were not just hunter-gatherers, we were farmers, we were astrologers, we were astronomers, mathematicians. So basically, most things that you're taught about Native peoples and Native histories is either wrong or it's about one decade of time, the 1790s, or maybe the 1700s and the 1800s. But that is just one little bitty snippet of our history. I really like this painting because it can kind of show you a little bit of the fashion before contact with Europe. Most men are going to be wearing breech cloths and women are going to be wearing skirts, but this is summer dress. So we don't actually get to see a lot of depictions of winter dress and what people would have been wearing when it was cold. We know they wore blankets, leggings, more skirts. You'll see that tattooing is a really big part of our culture before contact with Europe, and something I will talk about a little later that is becoming increasingly important today as well. Let's try it again. There we go. All right, so Myaamionki, the land of the Miami, or the place of the Miami. So this is actually the map that I grew up with when I talked about and was learning about our homelands. So as you can see, it's a little bit hard for most people today to understand because there's no state lines. To me, the state line is rather unimportant. It's more about the rivers and where our villages were. I actually get myself into trouble sometimes because I never differentiate whether I'm in Ohio or Indiana when I'm giving this talk. And when I talk about our removal, I sometimes get the dates mixed up because I consider Myaamionki as one place rather than three: Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. So these are our biggest villages, and Kikayonge there on the right with the star, that is Fort Wayne. That is our biggest village, one of our most important places that we are in today, or at least near today. This map is a little bit easier for you to understand, I imagine. So this is also Myaamionki. Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and parts of Michigan are really the centers of our homeland. These are the places that all of our stories are centered on, our ecologies, our histories, our astronomy. It's all based on these places, not Oklahoma, where we are residing today. And the process of us getting to Oklahoma really started in the 1760s when France was beat by the British in the 7 Years' War, I believe. So the French gave the British their claims to Myaamionki. Unfortunately, even by their own legal system, this was an illegal seizure because they didn't even have the right of conquest as an excuse to do so. They actually just showed up and said, this is ours, but they didn't actually win. They didn't conquer anything. They just said it was theirs. This thing really doesn't want to stay up. And then 2 decades later, at the next Treaty of Paris, because they really are original when they're naming these things, the British ceded their claimed lands in Myaamionki to the Myaamaki, the Americans. Once again, this is an illegal seizure from our allies. So at the time, we considered the French our fathers. So the way that a lot of tribes in the eastern woodlands related to other groups of people was with familial relations. We actually called the French our father because they were supposed to take care of us and help us. So we kind of considered that a betrayal. And then the British came in and did the exact same thing. In terms of who we were really good friends with, the French were our best friends, the British we tolerated, and the Americans are unfortunately the worst case scenario in the 1780s. Today that's different, but at this time, you can tell even by their name, the Myaamionki, the big knives. That is how we thought of the Americans. When we had relations with people, often our names for them was a descriptor. It took on our relation to those people. My favorite is the word for Germans, which means speaks poorly. Because I believe it's because our accents really were incompatible. We just really we couldn't communicate very well. But Myaamionki, the big knives, are because normally we met in battle with Americans rather than at a treaty table. So this starts the Myaamionki Wars in the 1780s. And it starts with wars because we were never beaten. We were never conquered by the French or the British. We were friends with them. So when they ceded their lands to these people, they had to go to war with us to actually take over what they had gotten from the French and British. This started our wars. It's not actually Little Turtle versus Anthony Wayne. I just do that for dramatic effect. It was a series of leaders and a series of tribes. The Northwest Confederacy was not Little Turtle leading the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and all of these people. It was all of their leaders working together to defeat a much bigger enemy. Unfortunately, that did not work. It is not that the Confederacy couldn't resist the Americans so much as that it was no longer worth it to try and resist militarily. So even if we won, like St. Clair's defeat, the worst defeat the U.S. military has ever had, if you take percentages and stuff. Even with that, they just sent a bigger army the next year. For us, every man who died was a family starving that winter. So it didn't matter if we won or lost battles. When you fought battles with the Americans, you lost no matter what. So after the Battle of Fallen Timbers, this led to the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. Little side note about the Battle of Fallen Timbers, it was a very minor skirmish. Only about half of the combatants were actually present at the battle, and only 84 men died, 44 of which were Americans. But it was the British kind of backing out on their claims of being allies to us, and the Americans sending in agents to start breaking down the relationship between the different tribes. That's really what kind of broke the back of the Northwest Confederacy, or as we say, the Tawawa-Sipiwe Alliance, because it wasn't the Northwest to us. So that's something to think about when you're even talking about what these things are called, is that why would we call ourselves the Northwest Indian Alliance when we're the center? So just think about how different perspectives change the way you might look at things. 1795, it starts a period of land secessions for the Miami people. You can see here in 1795 that we had to cede most of Ohio in these little bitty pockets. And those pockets are actually for military bases. So that it would be that much harder for us to rise up militarily or even resist militarily against the Americans. And it was not the end. So this led to an unfortunate pattern of Americans encroaching on the land, us trying to resist, and then the military being sent in to sweep away the people who tried to, save their own farm. Keeps going. And then in 1840, our principal chief at the time, J.B. Richardville, or Pinjawa as I call him, saw what he thought was the writing on the wall. He thought that the only way that we could continue to exist as Myaamia, as Myaamiaki, as Miami people, was to agree to removal west. We think that he saw it as the only way to survive. We were either going to be killed or we were going to assimilate so much that we would cease to exist. Unfortunately for him, you will get to places like this, the Myaamionki Council House. This one actually existed until the 1970s when a local historian tore it down. It always kills me that a historian did it because he just thought it was an old shack and he had no idea what it was. But at places like this, J.B. Richardville and other Americans kind of realized the mistake in their logic is that Miami people, we are very quietly stubborn. So in 1846, we're still there. We didn't leave. Nobody wanted to leave their homes. We had been there since time immemorial for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years even. We didn't want to leave our homes. So in 1846, we actually still have people building farms, building fences, expanding the houses that they already live on. So we didn't want to leave. And this actually led to a generation of lawyers that we had that actually started resisting American expansion legally, getting individual family exemptions from removal. So we actually have a really large population of Miami people who live in the Fort Wayne area. So we actually had about half of our population ended up getting exempted from removal, a little less than half. Unfortunately, on September 26th of 1846, U.S. troops arrived at Peru, Indiana, and rounded us up at gunpoint. They kept us there for a few days after they loaded us onto the boats to make sure that no one else had gotten away, that no one had escaped to any other communities. So they spent a few days rounding everybody up. But the people who were there spent that entire time on some boats. We are not a boating people. So even pre-contact, into contact, we were actually known for running next to the river, not even canoeing down it. So even something like that would have been not foreign to us, but not something we preferred to do. And so rounding us up at gunpoint, putting us on boats with winter oncoming, you'll see paintings, you'll hear descriptions of people in their pajamas and winter clothes. And sometimes with removal stories, people were given no time whatsoever. Whatever they had on their back is what they got. For us, we did have a little bit of warning, but you'll still see depictions of people without shoes on or in pajamas with winter coming on. And you might wonder why that is. Unfortunately, that did happen. What happened was that some people, instead of getting winter coats and shoes, visited their grandparents and children for the last time in the graveyards and took handfuls of soil and put them in sacks. So they were able to go visit those people one last time before they were removed. And then they were put on these boats. And this is the Myaamionki removal route, which started on October 6th. So from 26th until the 6th, we were held on those boats as prisoners. And then we started on the Miami-Erie Canal down into Cincinnati, which took until October 11th. We stayed there for a day. This is 1848, so this is 2 years after we were removed there. No major renovations or constructions are recorded at that time, so we think that this is roughly exactly what Myaamionki people would have saw as they were removed. And these kinds of boats are the ones that we would have been removed on. Unfortunately, we were not put on these boats on top. We were actually put in the cargo holds with the pigs and the sheep. We still have those boats' inventory lists and passenger lists. We are literally put in between the pigs and sheep rather than on the passenger list with everyone else. So by the time we got down to Oklahoma, or down to Kansas City, dysentery and sickness were pretty rampant, and several people ended up dying along the trip, including one 16-year-old boy who was actually exempted from removal, but he wanted to know where his uncle was going. So he went along with it and died. Unfortunately, his mother, we do have her letters talking about this afterwards, and it's quite heartbreaking because of how unnecessary it was. November 1st, we finally get to the Kansas landing in Kansas City. When we got there with dysentery running quite rampant amongst us, we actually had to then hike down to our reservation. And when we got there, it was only 2/3 as big as we were promised, because all the land had already been given away. And then we stayed there for about 20 years before that land was deemed too valuable for us to have, and we were forced to remove again to Indian Territory, which is now Ottawa County, Oklahoma. This is our Sugar Creek Reservation. This is where we were put alongside some of our related tribes. But the land there is very fertile, and oil was discovered nearby, so we were removed again. This is where most of the tribes are at today. Ottawa County, in that very far right corner, is where we are. We actually share a reservation with the Peoria tribe. So our reservations have actually been reinstated with the McGirt decision. So does anyone know what the McGirt decision is? So it was a Supreme Court decision about a bad case, but what it did was reinforce the fact that reservation status cannot be revoked except by an act of Congress. So all of these reservations have been reinstated so that they are under tribal jurisdiction, because they were never broken down by Congress. So actually, just this last year, our reservation was reinforced, and now instead of 2,000 acres, we have 70,000 acres in Oklahoma, which does create some problems. So there are several towns in those reservations, and how our jurisdiction versus county police jurisdiction, or where to the fire department, where are they allowed to go, is something that we've had to figure out. It's less of a problem for us because we actually have a really good relationship with the towns around us. During COVID, we actually paid for a lot of people's water bills so they didn't lose their houses when they lost their jobs. So we actually have a lot of really good blood between us and the surrounding communities. That's not always true. There are some, like in Kansas City or Tulsa, where you might have somebody speeding and they pull a tribe card and say, well, you can't pull me over because you're a county sheriff. But most of the time people have been cross-deputized now, so it doesn't matter. But it does create some issues and some amazing things. We now have 70,000 acres to help support ourselves now. 2,000 was not enough. We have 7,000 members who are Miami now. So it's been a really awesome boon to see that again. And we can kind of thank these guys, our Miami tribal leadership, for all the good things that are happening to us right now. So in the center is our chief, Akema Langford, and the other council members. We call them our business council because in the 1920s, the U.S. government forced native tribes to take on constitutions that emulated the United States and businesses. So they actually wanted tribes to become almost like a business, to be profitable. So that is why our business council is called that. I never call them that. I just call them the council because it makes more sense to my brain. And they are kind of the ones that have approved and spearheaded our revitalization. So our cultural revitalization. Stomp dancing. This is actually a much more traditional dance to us than powwows. Powwows are a thing that actually start after removal. That's what happens when eastern woodland cultures and plains cultures start to meld. And that's where powwows come out of. I don't know why we call it stomp dancing. You're not really dancing, you're just walking in a circle and singing. It's more about the singing and building community. Most things we do are about building community. Our storytelling practices, we're very lucky, never really stopped. So in any ones that were not being told, we actually had written down. And the guy on the very far right top right, is starting to write stories again. So our revitalization is successful. These are the Myaamionki, the painted hide robes. We are now starting to revitalize the art of painted hide robes. These ones are just into contact with France, and that's where they are at today. And you would actually have a matched robe, bag, moccasins, and possibly tattoos. So you can see here that we have started doing this again. We have started painting hides that we have harvested the deer, we tan the hide, we gather the minerals, and we paint them. So our connection to land and our connection to place is starting to become feasible for us again, because for a long time it wasn't. And earlier I said that some of the tattooing practices are starting to come back. So you can see here the art styles that are on the Myaamionki are probably very closely related to traditional tattooing practices. And that art of tattooing in the same styles of these hides is starting to become prevalent with us again. You can see here I'm actually at the Musée de Quai in Paris, showing that I actually have several of the tattoos, or the hides tattooed on my arms. And it was actually a lot more tear-jerking when I saw them than I thought they would be. These are things that our community has known about for 100 years and have never had access to them before. After they went to France, we never got to see them again. So the fact that we are now able to do so causes a whole lot more tears than you might think, because these are our only painted objects that are made of hide that we have access to and knowledge of. There are only 4 of them, maybe 5, that we know of in the entire world. And we actually got to go and touch them again, which was pretty amazing. Another thing that we've started doing again is Myaamionki, or lacrosse. Our style of stick, as you can see there in the bottom left, is that circle. We don't use Iroquoian style sticks. The whole community plays. You can see there our chief is playing with some kids. When we play games, there are no leagues. There's only one rule. You can't touch the ball with your hand. That's it. That's the only rule. So games can get pretty rough, but generally you play to your opponent. I'm not going to, tackle a 9-year-old kid, but he might try and tackle me. And, the glue that kind of holds this all together, Myaamionki, the Miami language, is something that we've discovered is the glue. Once we started teaching the language again, once we got it out of dormancy, we've noticed an uptick on every other single kind of cultural expression. All of it is starting to become revitalized because of our language. So that is really like the pinnacle of things we do. We have memorized lessons, we have dictionaries online, we have ethnobotanical databases in our language, we have summer youth camps that we send kids to in the summer to learn language, history, and ecology, all from a Miami perspective and with Miami teachers. It's something that I grew up with. I'm a product of Myaamionki, the summer programs. So I can say I hope it's a success. It's working. Our culture is being revitalized. We even have a community blog. We call it a blog, but it's really a high-end education source for adults. I don't really know how else to say that than a community blog, but it really is amazing. I recommend going at least, skimming over a few of the articles. And I promised that we would talk about the bicentennial. So that's the wrong bicentennial logo, but that's what kind of we're here to talk about, is the differences in perspective. So you noticed how I kept coming back to our connection to place, our connection to ecology and history. It's all here. So the tribal government and most tribal citizens are down in Oklahoma today, but our entire worldview, history, and ecology all centers here. So when we talk about and think about the bicentennial of Fort Wayne, you should really start to think about what that means for the people that made that possible. When you talk about something that happened, but it happened on our backs, but we're still here, you have to think about the fact that it's not all positive. It's not all something to be proud of, but it's not something to be forgotten by any means. This is a thing that happened. It was a very important thing that happened. But you have to think about the ethics and how we think about it today. When I think about the bicentennial of Fort Wayne, I must be honest, it's not positive really at all. Because as much as I love my home, Ottawa County, Oklahoma is kind of barren. There's not much there. When I come up here and see how lush everything is and how amazing it is to live here, what a good place it is, you have to think about the discrepancy there. The land that we were given in Kansas was still way different We lived in the plains in Kansas. We're not a plains people. I don't know how to get water out of grass, but I can go do it in the forest. And they had even more of a connection to the land. So when they were moved to Kansas, it was really hard for them, but it was still very fertile. And then we got removed to Oklahoma, and it's not fertile, and it's dry. It's not hell on earth, but it's not the best place to live. So when you think about the fact that this is an amazing place, Fort Wayne is a good place to live, in any way you really think about it, that it's not always great. So when we hear people celebrating Anthony Wayne, really don't like that. He's an important American figure. We understand that. He did a lot during the Revolution. He is I don't know if I call him a founding father, but he is an important person during that time. We don't want his history to be forgotten. We don't want him to not be taught about. But when you celebrate somebody who single-handedly orchestrated the forced removal of our people from our home at gunpoint, you really got to understand that it's not about hurt feelings. It's about what are you really celebrating when you celebrate him. It's not great. It's a hard thing to talk about. Even the Wayne National Forest, that's something that is a hot topic right now, because the tribes requested that the name be changed, and the Forest Service actually agreed, even up to the superintendent of the National Forest Service. He agreed. But then it came into the political realm, and it is kind of stalled because now both sides are using it for whatever they want. They don't actually care. But why do we celebrate Anthony Wayne with a national forest, one of the highest honors that you can give somebody? Because there's not a whole lot of national forests, and most of them aren't named after people. So what does that really say? What are we celebrating when we name national monuments, national forests, after men who did a whole lot of bad to fellow Americans? It's not even just others. To him, they were others, but to you guys, when we celebrate Anthony Wayne, you're doing it on my back too, not just my ancestors' back. So, yeah, no, it's not a fun discussion to have, but I really hope that at least this can generate some discussion. I would love some back and forth, talk about anything that I've talked about today. Yeah. Yes. Well, luckily, most of it's written down now, which helps. And we have more and more people moving back here. So I've moved up here. I know several people have moved up here from Oklahoma. Not saying the tribe is moving back, but a lot of citizens are coming back, and they are becoming cultural leaders. So our connection to this place is starting to grow stronger again. Down in Oklahoma, we have some of the same plants, so we really connect with those things that exist in both places. Some things we try and grow artificially; they don't grow too well down there. We also just teach about it. So just because 7 Pillars, I don't know if you guys know what that is, it's one of our most important cultural sites, is up here. But we still tell stories about that every single winter. We still have people come up and visit and send pictures to the people back home. I saw it for the very first time in my life 2 summers ago, ever. I've known about it for almost 30 years, and I never actually got to see it in person until 2 summers ago. So our connection to place is still here. Our center is not in Miami, Oklahoma, despite the fact that we are down there. It is here. So those connections to ecology, our connections to history, are just continuing. I don't know if I could describe why or how they're continuing, just that they are. The Miami culture is not from Miami, Oklahoma. It's only been down there for 200 years, but we've been here for thousands of years. So that connection isn't just going to go away. And we're also quietly stubborn. We're kind of bullying ahead because that's how we do things. We do things slow and steady. So we do them right the first time. But we also continue in the direction that we wanted to. Kikayonge, Fort Wayne. Oh, I mean, there would have been hundreds of families that lived there. Fort Wayne was a major village. It was our biggest one, at least post-contact. So something to think about when we were contacted with Europe. Some estimates is that 90% of the population in the continental United States died. 90% of them. That means only 3 people in this room get to live. And think about that. Think about what that does to social structures. So the guess is 5 to 30 million, because archaeologists can never agree on anything about exactly how many people were there. But there were a whole lot less by the time Europeans got here, because of the measles, smallpox, and the Black Plague came through, all within just a very short amount of time. So the village, which is down by the confluence of the river, would have been our largest place, but before contact with Europe, the villages and cities would have been even bigger than that. And that memory of those places continued through the contact period. So we didn't just live in small little, 5-person villages all the time. We were used to being a very social population. So that's why you always hear of us having feasts and having get-togethers, coming together as people, even over the decades. And as we're forced out of the Ohio region during the Beaver Wars, then we came right back to the same places that we lived at before. Because these places have always been special to us. Kikayonge has always been special to us. You find archaeology here going back 10,000 years, since right after the glaciers were here. This place is an amazing place to live. It's been an amazing place to live since humans could live here. It's not something that's going to go away. Obviously, people live here. We're going to continue to live here. It's an amazing place. Fort Wayne or Kikayonge was always important to us and is important to us to this day. We have actually a cultural resource extension office here in Fort Wayne. So it's more of an internal thing at the moment. It just hosts events and activities for our own citizens. But, it's our desire to eventually start doing other things. We'll see as time goes forward what all happens out of that. But, so it's not just something that was important to us historically. It's not something that was important to us, until 1990. It's something that we were actively trying to be active and present in today. That's why I drove from Cleveland this morning, at one request. Is how important this place is to us today. For now. Well, one, people just tell us things. And two, so when I say historic preservation officer for a tribe, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer specifically refers to a title granted by Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So any kind of federal money or federal land that happens on a project that involves ground disturbance, we get information about that project. And as you can imagine, that's thousands of projects a year. We cover 10 states today, though obviously Indiana is kind of the center. It's our most important place. But we kind of do the whole spread, all 10 states. So we get hundreds and hundreds of sources from counties, cities, state agencies, federal agencies, individuals who found this thing, who happened to get my email from some 3 people removed that they knew of. We have people who live here who tell us things. We have a lot of written, documented sources. We still have oral histories about these places. Folk tales that people tell us about that mound that's 100 yards that way. But if you actually look in the record books, it's right where we're standing. So our sources are wide and varied about history. We also don't just concern ourselves with history. A lot of FIPOs, the acronym for Historic Preservation Officer, also are worried about ecology and endangered species and important cultural plants and places. Whether the archaeology is disturbed or not, normally we don't care. I don't care about that, because that place is still special, whether a plow went through the building or not. That's still where the council house was. So yeah, does that answer your question? I'll keep ranting, but yeah, I mean, the last numbers that I've read was, we've been here for at least 23,000 years. People move around a lot, so in 23,000 years, probably there's things all over the place. And the best places to live 5,000 years ago are still the best places to live, because that's nothing geological time. So, yes, basically look at where the town or city is. There's sites there. There's sites in between those places. We have maps that I can't show you, sorry, where we actually have a lot of documentation on where sites are, where mountains are, where individual features are even, depending on what they are, for historic preservation. So I consult those maps when I do Section 106 work, when we get consulted on construction projects, to make sure that we're okay with it. We don't know things are there. And about half of the tribes in the United States have FIPO offices, so we have most of the country covered when it comes to 106 concerns, especially east of the Mississippi. I don't know if I'd say bilingual, but I can speak a little bit. First language, I believe, in the 60s. So most of it's already written down. A lot of it's written down anyway. In a bilingual sense, yes. I wouldn't say that we have fluent speakers again yet, but we think by my grandkids' age, we will have first-generation speakers that are fluent in the language. That is our goal and hope. I will say there are definitely houses where it's very normal to speak Myaamionki whenever possible. So when you're cooking, you're only speaking Myaamionki. And have labels all over the house to help remind the kids. So yes, it's very normal for that to happen. I'm actually just really bad at practicing, but most of our cultural office do speak Myaamionki home whenever possible. And even when we're at community gatherings, we speak Myaamionki rather than English whenever possible. To whoever you're speaking to skill level. I'm not just going to go start talking at somebody in a language that maybe they should have understood because they didn't practice this last summer, but you're not going to communicate nothing. it is, what's important to people. I also don't like the name, obviously, for things. But, we also have to, I don't want to say be realistic, because these things are things that can very realistically happen. It's just we have to, bite off what we can chew. Talking to a national forest, making friends with their superintendent, and all agreeing that yes, the name needs to change is a lot different than convincing a city council to change their name and then spend all that taxpayer money on all the signs and all the advertising and stuff to change that. So we want to form partnerships with people that are sustainable and long-lasting. So yes, I agree. I don't want his name really anywhere. But we have to, baby steps. We have to work our way up to that. We actually have a temporary exhibit of these robes that are going to be happening within the next few years, hopefully, if everything goes correctly. But no, the permanent return of them is a different matter altogether. So in France, museums have been nationalized. So these are actually property of the French people. And it takes an act of Congress there and a law to be passed to return anything out of a museum. But a temporary exhibit can. So we're working with that museum to, work on it. We're hoping this can happen, and they're hoping it can happen. No, we can't actually take them back because that would become an international incident. And to be honest, we, like the tribe itself, we do not have a facility capable of taking care of these in a way that they deserve. So that's something to think about too, is when I was talking about Ottawa County not being the most lucrative place on earth, that affects even stuff like that. What can we physically do to bring these things back? Because we don't want to bring these things back and in 40 years, the humidity destroys them. So we're not ready for it yet, even if they were. Written? It started being written in the 1600s. So the Jesuit priests who very first came in, they were, for the time, they're actually really good anthropologists, though they didn't think of themselves that way. The Jesuit priests who came in were actually, by European standards, very good at recording what they saw without prejudice. So they wrote our language very accurately. They had a lot of really good linguists because they were used to going to foreign places to try and convert people. So 1600s into the 1960s, we have things that are being written down phonetically, alphabetically, any way that you can think about it. People were writing them down. So we know Nila, Myaamionki, I'm saying that correctly because of all of the things that have been written down and recorded. For a number of oil companies. So the McGirt decision and like the real life ramifications of that is something that is ongoing. So the consequences of that decision and what it happens to oil companies or towns is still something we have to figure out. So maybe legally, yes, there are oil companies there. They are now in tribe reservation stuff. But that doesn't mean that the tribe can just go kick them out. No, we wouldn't get any kind of money. We can't tax non-tribal citizens. So one thing about reservations is that most reservations, the law only applies to tribal citizens. So you could go and do some pretty horrible things on a reservation and get away with it, unless the FBI is willing to get involved, or a federal marshal. Tribal police can, get you with a misdemeanor, but that's it. They cannot give you a felony for anything. So unless the feds are willing to get involved, no. We can't tax people. We can't keep people out of their homes. Not that we would want to do that anyway. but that's not something the reservation needs. Yes, not Anthony Wayne. I think it's the tone, whether that's good or bad. I think I saw something. So they do not. The schools that used to do that there were specific schools. Not every school could do that. They're called boarding schools. You've read about the boarding schools. Not all of them were the hellscapes that you'll read online, but those were the ones that got paid for having tribal citizens in them. Yeah, well, some of them turned into public schools. So they started as private entities, but it was at a time when things were quite informal between what was government and what wasn't, and they turned into public schools as time went on. But those things, a lot of them, some of them are still public schools today. I don't think they still get money for it though, especially with the optics of some of the things they're finding out about these boarding schools now. But yeah, no, I'm not. That's the thing that happens, especially out on reservations. You can get some of that stuff. No, so the Trail of Tears, that's just the Cherokee story. So every tribe has its own story about what happened. The Modoc in Oregon actually removed east, which is super weird, because they were removed east to Oklahoma from Oregon. So I'm not sure what their name is. The Potawatomi call it the Trail of Death. We call it a removal story, a forced removal. So most tribes have their own individual story. So it's not the Trail of Tears, it's 574 different Trail of Tears. The land runs in the 1890s. Yeah, same situation that happened in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and every state west of literally every single state, where U.S. citizens would come in, decide they want the land, and unless it was some kind of, very small, contained thing, normally they could kind of bully their way in and get it. So the land runs, yes, most of that would have been tribal land, especially when you look at that map on where the reservations are today. That yes, a lot of it was tribal land, but we were kind of powerless. If we tried to do anything, then we were uprising, and then that got stamped out real quick. Seven Pillars is a site of 7 limestone pillars along a river near Peru, Indiana. It is a site where some of our, where our Linapinchi, our underwater panther, his home is there. It is something, there was a trading house that was there. There was a village that was there. It is a really good center for the Miami connection of place. So Miami people still visit there every year. You can just Google Seven Pillars and it will come up. It is just a really important cultural place that we still visit quite a bit today. It's in some of our winter stories. So we were telling stories about this place 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So it's still important to us even after all that. Yes. So the site itself is owned by the Arch Nature Reserve. So acres. Yes, you're right. I knew that. Acres. So acres does protect it as a nature preserve. However, the dam on that river is actually causing increased erosion, and so now it does not look like it used to. The pillars are kind of being worn away, and it probably won't be too much longer, and those pillars are just going to be gone because of the flooding that happened because of the dam. Yeah, hopefully that changes, but we shall see. Say another hand there. I would highly recommend going to that. It is very nice. And Katrina Mitten's beadwork really is amazing. I mean, it goes into national museums all the time. She's won national competitions. It's really amazing.